Good morning. I'm Stuart Thorpe from the PMI Belgian chapter, where I'm the Climate Crisis Lead. Welcome to our keynote session. I feel very privileged to introduce Simon King as our keynote speaker. Simon King is an award-winning naturalist, conservationist, filmmaker, author, and artist who's been filming, producing, and presenting natural history films for over 40 years. Production that Simon's been particularly closely involved in include Planet Earth, Blue Planet, Spring Watch, and The Big Cat Diary. His most recent projects for television was the most ambitious series on British wildlife to date, called Wild Isles, which I'm sure many of you have seen recently on the BBC, on BBC One. Awards include 3 Emmys, several BAFTAs, and Simon was awarded the OBE in 2010 for his services to conservation and wildlife cinematography. Over to Simon for his presentation on the theme of enough.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, and thank you everybody. It's a great pleasure indeed. It's an honor to be here today on the Sustainability Summit organised by the Project Management Institute. It's a real opportunity, I think, for, I hope, a catalyst for change to each and every one of us as individuals, and also specifically for the industry that you represent. You have a tremendous opportunity here to affect very real change in your own lives, but of course in the businesses and the industries that you affect. I think I should probably start today by pointing out that I do have a condition which is it's actually become increasingly rare, this condition, nature elicited response disorder, also known as NERD. I am a self-confessed nerd, nature nerd. I've always had a huge passion for the natural world. I can't tell you where it started. I just know that it's always been with me, and it's a blessing. It could be a little bit of a curse sometimes, because one of the symptoms of being a nature nerd is that I identify and understand all of the natural voices that are around me, and I can be walking next to a river or a lake having a really serious conversation with somebody. I can be right in the middle of a sentence, and then I'll hear these sounds, this high-pitched, piercing call, and I will stop the sentence and go, "Kingfisher!" and I'll blurt it out at people and make them jump. The saving grace, of course, is that they might get to see a kingfisher, because kingfishers always let you know they're coming with their voice. That's one of the benefits of being a nature nerd is hearing and understanding the world around you means that it becomes increasingly rich, or has the potential to do so. As a kid, I was always devouring whatever information I could access, and one of the most influential books for me at the time was this, the Reader's Digest AA book of British birds, a beautifully illustrated book. The artist Raymond Harris Ching painted these extraordinary plates, and I would devour the information in this book. It was published in 1969, and it's, when one looks back at it, become something of a snapshot of the state of nature, or at least of bird life, avian nature, across Britain and Ireland at the time. I mean, take, for example, this plate on kites, red kites, which, when I was a kid, were incredibly rare in the UK. Look at the distribution map on that plate. A tiny little green patch in the middle of Wales, which is an over-exaggeration because there were about 20 pairs nesting in the late 60s, early 70s, right in the middle of Wales. They were almost extinct in the UK. And now we have red kites back right across the British Isles with a vengeance as a consequence of a proactive reintroduction program. Now one can see not just 1 or 2 red kites. I made a vigil to mid Wales when I was a kid. I went on a pilgrimage to go and see a pair of nesting red kites when I was a kid. Now one can see them in numbers across the south of England, across parts of Scotland and the Midlands, which is such a wonderful example of how things can go right. And they're not unique. There's a beautiful painting of a peregrine. And again, one has to just take a little look at the distribution map here in the late 60s to see that they were really rare. There was still something of a stronghold in Scotland. But when I was born, 1962, there were probably fewer than 70 pairs nesting across the whole of the UK as a consequence of, yes, they'd been persecuted, but also the devastating effects of organochlorine pesticides on their breeding. It made their egg shells fragile and they would break, and so there was no breeding whatsoever. They looked to be a bird destined for extinction in the UK, and yet now, and this is without any direct intervention, the only change has been that we've banned the persecution, not always successfully, and we have banned the organochlorine pesticides for use in the UK, sadly, being used elsewhere in the world from time to time. But now you can see peregrine falcons. It's gone from fewer than 70 pairs to over 1,500 pairs in the UK now. This bird happens to be nesting in a city in Bath. They're now not an uncommon sight. In fact, most of our big cities have them, and they're doing rather well. But these, sadly, are the exceptions. These are the good news stories to, I suppose, illustrate that something good can happen. But part of the affliction of being a nerd is that I also notice what's missing. And there are so many examples, sadly, of species in the UK, and this is reflected across the planet as a whole. I'm just using this as a microcosm, as an example of things that have changed for the worse. Skylark, great example. Beautiful bird. Well, actually, to look at, it's a bit of an LBJ, a little brown job, but nonetheless, a bird that has inspired poets and composers. Look at the distribution map here, everywhere. A common bird across grasslands, right across the British Isles, and the sound of a skylark singing. Gosh, it's liquid gold. It is liquid gold pouring from the sky. They sustain it from on high, and sadly, that voice is one that is disappearing across the UK. There are a few places still, of course, where one can hear them, thankfully, but it is not common. And that's as a direct consequence of our actions on the land. I'll come to more about that later. And skylark aren't unique in this by any means. Cuckoo, a bird that was, again, widespread. Look at the map. It's widespread. It's everywhere in the UK in the 60s. Now, you're lucky if you hear this sound in spring. It is the sound of spring. It's the very essence of spring. So much so that at the time, the Times expected, the newspaper, the Times expected someone to write in when the first cuckoo of spring was heard, and it would always publish, first cuckoo has been heard. They've become so rare. That little notification, that hallmark, that poignant moment in the year has been forgotten. What a tragedy. What an absolute tragedy. And one other voice, which you may or may not be familiar with, probably not, because it has become so rare, that of the turtle dove. Let me just listen to that for a second or two. Oh, that sounds like sunshine to me. And as a kid, it was the sound of sunshine. It was the sound of summer. They're a migratory little dove. And they were relatively common. They were widespread across the whole of the south and the middle of England. And in the text, which I don't expect you to read, it makes a point here. It says, it's a bird that feeds on the weed of arable fields, common fumitory. And therein lies a clue, a weed of arable fields. We don't have weeds in arable fields. We've got rid of them. We call them weeds. We've got rid of them. And with them and with the cuckoo and with the skylark, whether it be through pesticides, through insecticides, or just the way we manage the land, we have crushed these souls, these little souls, into the brink of extinction, or very nearly. Some of them indeed have gone completely. Before I go into more detail about what it is that's caused all of this, I'm going to take a step back. A long step back and just talk about the system, Earth. Planet Earth is a closed system. The matter on this planet is the same matter that was here 4.5 billion years ago in the origin of the planet. and nothing's coming in, nothing's going out. Okay, there's the odd meteor. Okay, but generally speaking, there's no fresh stuff. Everything here, everything is recycled. Everything that is, apart from the energy that we, of course, get from the sun, the very energy that is the basis of all life. Without it, there can be none. But otherwise, there's nothing fresh. Absolutely nothing. Indeed, we are made out of recycled material. Every bit of us, our oxygen, our carbon, our hydrogen, the nitrogen that makes a human being, and all the other wee bits and bobs that are left over, everything has been around from the very beginning of the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago. Nothing fresh, nothing new, nothing coming, which is a sobering thought. And that's fine when you consider that we've been made out of stardust. I mean, it's a romantic notion. We are literally made out of stardust. All good, so long as you work with the pattern of nature, so long as you are doing what it is that the natural systems support. And we did that as a species for a very, very long time. We mucked along with the rest of the natural world as hunter-gatherers, bright ones and successful ones, but nonetheless, we were limited by the rules of nature. You couldn't get out more than was coming in, simple as. And as a consequence, our population bumped along, maybe, I suppose, at its peak around 2 million hominids for most of our existence as a species on Earth, right up until about 10,000 years ago. And then something extraordinary happened. We had a change where the climate became pretty stable. Up until then, the climate had been a volatile element in our existence, as well as every other living thing. And then there was a stable period. In that stability, we applied our intellect and we started to harness the power of nature with agriculture. We started to modify the land to grow crops. We domesticated creatures, and that changed our lot very significantly. I say very significantly, but let's put this into perspective. We maybe went from a couple of million to a few more, because again, we could only get out what was being put in from the sun, from the energy that was afforded, and of course the vagaries of the natural world. Let's have a little look at how that affected our population. Agriculture 10,000 years ago, the beginning of agriculture, absolutely stable for a long, long, long time, many thousands of years, right up until what's often referred to as the agricultural revolution, when we changed our methods, our practices, and became cleverer at what we did. We still were working the land, but we did it in a more, I suppose, efficient way, and our population started to bump, but still very modest, very, very modest, right up until very recent times. And you can see how that population spikes. It's astonishing. It beggars belief. So it wasn't just the agricultural revolution that suddenly made us spike. Of course, it was this stuff. Coal, fossilized trees that we found in the ground. We basically dug up ancient sunshine, because that's what this is. Coal is sunshine from millions of years ago being trapped, harnessed, and locked in the earth, along with the carbon that it holds. Same as oil, which is, of course, planktonic life, animal and plant plankton that is fossilized, gone down into the seabed and under the crushing power of the earth. And we found that we could unlock ancient sunshine. We broke the natural laws. And with that, at the turn of around 1800 or just after 1800, our population broke the 1 billion mark. And that's just about at the same period as the Industrial Revolution, the harnessing of this ancient sunshine. We now stand at 8.1 billion, roughly, humans on Earth, and we are consuming and pumping gases into the atmosphere at a rate that has never been seen before. And if you live in Europe, here in the UK, you might say, well, what's the big fuss? It's a pretty green land. That's a good distribution map showing the red spots being urban fabric. Doesn't look like a lot. Most of it is green. And when you do look at a British countryside, you say, well, look, there is a green and pleasant land right there. What's wrong with that? That's nature. The truth is that's an area I know very, very well in Somerset, and most of that is an environmental desert. The biodiversity in that space is denuded. It used to have skylarks everywhere. I would hear that beautiful song all over the place. It used to have lapwing down on the Somerset levels, and indeed on the hills. These are a wading bird, and corn buntings, and I would hear redshank, and I would hear and see curlew nesting in those fields. They have gone. Yes, there's some life, but it's gone, and it's gone because of the intensification of agriculture as a whole. Even the arable fields, which could and should harvest all sorts of flowers supporting birds like the turtle dove, nothing other than the crop to feed our ravenous appetites at an efficient rate. And by efficient, I'm talking financially here rather than in terms of the survival of the planet as a whole. Even grassland, which you might think, well, what could be wrong? That's a desert. This is grass just cut for silage to feed, let's face it, animals. It's to feed the animals that we eat. It's the most inefficient way of us getting food currently. I'm going to look at this specifically with a little bit of detail. I want to look at how much land it takes to produce food. So it takes over 30 square meters to produce a kilo of beef, compared to about a square meter to produce a kilo of vegetables. And you could say, oh, okay, Simon, so beef is much more nutritious, surely, than a kilo of vegetables. Well, okay, let's turn it into calories. How many meters does it take to produce 1,000 calories? For beef, just over 30 square meters. For vegetables, just under 2. So it's unequivocal. The proof is right there. You can see that meat is not an efficient, the way we currently produce it is not an efficient way of us getting our calories. And of course, it's a massive contributor to greenhouse gases with the methane produced by cattle. The way that we intensify our production of meat and dairy products is unsustainable for the planet. It just is. And it's driven by our appetite. It's not driven by anything else. All of the wild animals put together don't, the biomass of all the wild creatures on Earth put together don't come anywhere close to the biomass of all the domestic creatures that we now host on Earth. And it's not just the land that has been affected so dramatically. The seas too. This is bottom dredging. It's a practice used to harvest mollusks by and large, scallops being one of them, clams, others, anything on the seabed. And the way it's done, for those of you who may not know, is that this dredger is put down onto the seabed and is dragged along the seabed. If you did this in a national park, there would be outcry, because you would see the entire land surface scraped and denuded. But this is going on the seabed where we don't see it. Okay, how much of the seabed is dredged? Not that much, actually. In real terms, about 1.3, I think it is. I may have got that stat wrong. About 1.3% of the seabed is dredged. But the dredging industry is responsible for more carbon emissions than the entire aviation industry per year. And that's because it takes so much energy to pull that dredge, and because it's releasing carbon by being dragged along the seabed, releasing carbon and pumping it into the atmosphere. So the next time you consider eating a bowl or a plate of scallops, think, did a diver go down to pick that up? Pretty sustainable, or was it done through dredging? Ask the questions. And that's what this is all about, is about us as individuals and organizations asking those difficult questions before we jump in. Extinction is part of Earth's history. Extinction events, mass extinction events, have occurred through the millennia. Not many of them, it has to be said. The big ones, 5, are recognized as the big 5, including the Permian extinction, which wiped out over 90% of species alive on Earth at the time. The hallmark of an extinction event is that over 75% of species are made extinct in a period less than 2 million years. That's the current gold standard, if there could be such a thing with an extinction event. And right now, we are so well on the course to the 6th great extinction. It's underway. We're in it right now. The big difference, the massive difference, is that all of the previous mass extinction events that occurred on Earth did so through natural phenomena, whether it be volcanic activity or giant meteorites hitting the Earth. This one is us. We are responsible. We know what we're doing. Not only are we pumping more CO2 into the environment than the Earth has witnessed for, I think it's 500 million years. Not only are we doing that, not only are we acidifying and warming our seas, killing off a whole species, vast tracts of life, killing the very thing that gives us the oxygen that protects us, the planktonic life that gives us more oxygen than almost anything else on Earth. Not only are we doing that, not only are we causing these catastrophic weather events, be it fire, flood, drought, but we are doing all of these things at exactly the same time, at a meteoric pace, a pace that the planet has never witnessed before. So what are we going to do about it? We have to look at ourselves as individuals and as businesses, and we have to say, what do we really need? Mass consumerism is a giant contributor to this. The idea that a business can work just because you can buy another one, it becomes obsolete last in 1 year and you need another. That's mobile phones, by the way. And waste, we've got to address the issue of waste. We should be looking at circular economy here, there, everywhere, wherever we can. We should be looking at material fabric waste. Like I say, we're in a closed system. Nothing new is coming here. We've got to use what we've got wisely. We must consider it. And especially with food, we've got to think about food waste. I'll come to that more in just a moment. Because we have the intelligence. This is the astonishing thing about us as a species. The planet has never seen anything like it before. We have the intelligence to know what we are doing and to find solutions. We can find ways to feed the planet, the human planet, without breaking the very systems that we depend on for life. We can do this. We can stop investing in fossil fuel related investments. We must stop investing in fossil fuel. We should be looking at alternative energy. We should be looking seriously all the time at this being the only way forward, whether it be solar directly or wind, which of course is caused by the sun, or tide, which is also caused by the sun because of the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon. All of these things are being driven by these celestial bodies that have given rise to this extraordinary mix of opportunity on a planet, a tiny little blue planet suspended in space. We've got to be thinking about these solutions as priorities. And we've got to be thinking about our food, where it comes from. I'm not saying don't eat meat. This happens to be a rewilding project in Sussex in England called NEP, and that's a Tamworth pig and longhorn cow. Both of these animals are fundamental and key to the habitat management. Without them, the habitat doesn't work. It doesn't support the creatures which live here, including, by the way, harping back to the beginning of this narrative, turtle doves. It's one of the best places in the UK for turtle doves, actually an increasing population, directly as a consequence of the way these animals manage and work the land. We have to be thinking about where our food comes from, whether it's from the sea, looking for opportunities to always get sustainable products wherever we can, and supporting that. And whether we have the opportunity in a window box, a square meter, or a back garden to grow our own, it's a great pleasure, but it's good. It's good for you. It's good for the planet to have good, fresh food that you can feel proud to have had some influence over. Instead of doing what so many of us do, and I've been guilty as the next person, reaching for what's ready. And that's the, ultra processed food, UPF, is a massive contributor to environmental degradation. Because in the end, you've got to ask yourself, haven't you, why, when you're buying a bit of food, what was the intention of the person who produced this food? Was it to lovingly give me nutrition? Was that what they were thinking? Or were they thinking, I can make a lot of money out of this? And almost all ultra processed food is the latter. It is there to drive your appetite, usually using sugars and other elements that will make you hungry and become addictive and actually cause what is undoubtedly the planet's next great epidemic, which is, or we're already in the midst of it, with obesity. Think about what it is that you are putting into you, because what you put into you directly impacts the planet as a whole. I'm going to start to wrap up because I think I've been talking for probably long enough. Why am I showing you a shiny car? I'm just asking you what's important. What is the most important thing to you in life? Is it getting new stuff? Is it getting new things? Is it driving a business to make something that becomes obsolete in a few years, so you want another one? Is it always this mass consumerism, or is it thinking about what's important, what's truly important, what can give you happiness? Eating good food with friends, family, breathing clean air, drinking clean water, being in a planet where you can hear a turtle dove and a skylark. I think in the end, you've got to think about what it is that drives the most important decision in everything, whether it's a personal decision or a business decision. Of course, it's money and what you do with it. In the end, each and every one of us has the most powerful tool in our pocket. It's what we do with it, what we do with our resources, our money, how we spend it, that will change the course of the future. I believe we can do it for the better, and for the better, not just for ourselves, for the planet as a whole. But we have to ask ourselves that question: what's enough? Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Simon. God, choking my throat. I'm quite touched by that, quite moved by a wonderful presentation. Love your passion for nature and your insights into our origins and the clear articulation of the challenges that we've caused and that we face. We've got some comments in the chat. So Ruth, if you could bring those through.
Oh, well, that's great, Marion. Yeah, you are very lucky to hear skylarks. They're a species which, I'm here in the Lake District currently, and it's a bird that should be singing from every field. And tragically, it's not. And that is because of the way the land is managed, because there's nowhere for them to nest. They need rough grassland, and they need that grassland to be left more or less untouched. The animals can walk through it, but they need to have places where they can lay their eggs and raise their young without being squished. And sadly, that's not the case over most of Britain and a lot of Europe. So yeah, you're very lucky. Economics part of the climate problem. I think economics are the problem. I think that's it. And I hope towards the end of that presentation, I suggested that you are empowered because you are the driver of economics. We all are. We are the consumer. Without us, without the purchase power that a consumer has, there is no business. So if we support unsustainable businesses with the money that we have at our disposal, whatever that may be. Let me just give you a little stat, and just shut me up, Stuart, if I go on for too long. But let me give you a stat. When I was a kid, just before, in fact, the percentage of household income spent on food was about a third of household income. About 35% of household income was spent on food in any given household. Now it's about 10 to 14%, which is an illustration of how we consider how important we think it is, I suppose. Now, this isn't to, don't get me wrong, I know there is food poverty, very real food poverty, not across the planet as a whole, but in every urban area. And one only has to look at an urban high street to look at a food desert where you can get nothing in the corner shop apart from ultra processed food. It's a tragedy. But this is because it's driven by economics and business. These are the businesses that can put their product on the shelf. And I'm not going to name names, but it's obvious. We all know who we're talking about. And if we have no option to get something good for the planet and good for us, then what are we going to do about it? So yes, economics is everything. There's a
final question.
Small valuable actions we can do. The single most, you get 3 votes a day, Eleanor. They're called breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
I think looking at the clock, I think we'll have to wrap up there, unfortunately, to keep the overall event on schedule. So Simon, thank you so much for that really inspirational talk. And I think it's for all of us to take away from this a personal reflection on what is enough for each of us as we look carefully at our lives based upon what the inspiration you've shared with us.